Hello, and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Today we look at a case of a notorious gangster who, when police raided his house, had bullet holes in his bedroom wall and 2 firearms hidden underneath his mattress. And this was just 2 months after being arrested for being part of a dangerous criminal gang which raided an elderly farmer's home and shot him twice during the process. Craig Reynolds was described by the judge as having quite an outrageous nonchalance to violence. Or in other words, he was someone who was very calm and relaxed around such serious crime. And it was fair to say the judge had made this opinion as Mr Reynolds had continued to operate in dangerous gun crime circles just weeks after the brutal attack on the 65-year-old Charles Baldwin, which happened in Awoken. Mr Reynolds, who was 36 at the time, was one of at least 4 men who stormed the West Lancashire home that belonged to Mr Baldwin. During the process, they took many expensive valuables. However, something went very wrong at the party, as the terrified pig farmer was blasted at close range in his knee and his ankle by a man who was known as a sadistic gun for hire, Mr Alan Daniels. The injury from the shooting was so bad, it had left Mr Baldwin with no choice but to have his foot amputated. It appeared to the police that Mr Reynolds was involved in quite a few firearm incidents that year, and seemingly without any qualms. The second firearms offence was discovered in a bizarre set of circumstances, when Mr Reynolds had turned up to the Kirkby ambulance station with what was reported to be a gunshot wound to his hand. Mr Reynolds had claimed he'd been persuaded to get into a car to talk to a man, but moments later, whilst inside the car, a different unknown rival gangster had suddenly climbed inside and armed with a loaded gun. A fight had taken place before Mr Reynolds explained he was shot during the struggle. The erratic nature of his story and the mentions of guns left medical staff with no choice but to alert the police in case the gangster who Mr Reynolds had spoke of decided to come back and cause him or the staff more serious harm. Once the police heard who was involved and listened to the story that Mr Reynolds gave, they were very suspicious to say the least, and decided to search Mr Reynolds' home in Kirkby, which had, in the police's words, revealed quite a different picture. Inside his bedroom, blood was found splattered on the door, and 2 guns were found underneath the bed mattress. There was also a bullet hole that was found in the bedroom wall. Mr Reynolds now decided that it was probably a good time to try and change his story. He told detectives that he had been home when an armed man had turned up at his house in a very violent manner, and explained how the gun had gone off whilst he had tried to disarm him. The 2 guns that were found were 9mm semi-automatic pistols, one of them a Kimar 92, which had been adapted to discharge noxious gas and liquid. Mr Reynolds' barrister had explained to the court that before the brutal armed robbery and the shooting which had took place in autumn, Mr Reynolds, who had only ever been charged with a burglary, had never served a custodial sentence in his life, and it is quite frankly unbelievable that he had become involved in this type of offending. However, Judge Graham Knowles QC told Mr Reynolds, "You chose to live a two-faced life. You are so untroubled by the sadistic brutality that was inflicted by Mr Daniels that you yourself had a semi-automatic pistol in your possession just weeks later. It was quite outrageous and nonchalant for you to show that type of offending again." Mr Reynolds, who had denied conspiracy to aggravated robbery and also to having a firearm with intent, along with Anthony Hill and Dean Sanders, was found guilty after a trial in Preston Crown Court, and as a result of this, was handed a 28-year sentence by Judge Knowles. The sentence broken down was as followed. He received 20 years for the Awoken raid, in which Mr Baldwin was shot by a member of his gang, and 5 years for having a gun in his possession in his home in Kirkby, which the police had found after he turned up to the ambulance station after his hand was shot. The judge also gave him an extension on this sentence of 3 years. Mr Reynolds was classed as a dangerous offender and was also classed as a serious risk of danger to the public. Judge Knowles ordered that Mr Reynolds must serve at least 2/3 of his tariff in prison before he can be considered for release, meaning that Mr Reynolds will remain in prison for just over 18 years. If he's able to complete all the necessary courses and convince the parole board to release him in the future, he will be at the very least aged about 54 when he becomes a free man. Judge Knowles also said that Mr Daniels and his accomplices had caused appalling and wholly unnecessary suffering to two decent and very innocent people, Mr Baldwin and his partner, Patricia, who were both brutally terrorised in their own home. Mr Baldwin has described how it is unclear how many men entered his bungalow on his home farm on the back lane. The only person who he could be sure was there was Mr Daniels, but Mr Baldwin had recounted that all the people that were there were wearing gloves, hoods and balaclavas. Mr Baldwin also remembered that each robber had his own gun, and every gun was loaded. The gang had announced their arrival at the countryside farm on the evening of July the 28th, 2019, by shooting at the summer house where Mr Baldwin was sleeping after a day's work, blowing the door off and shouting, "Get out or we'll shoot you out." Further details were revealed in the court that one of the gang had warned Miss Mazzell, who was Miss Baldwin's partner, that "we're gonna shoot you, love," and the gun was placed on her foot. Mr Baldwin was twice shot during the robbery, once in his knee and once in his ankle. This was due to Mr Daniels not being happy with the speed of him complying with his demands, and also appearing unhappy with the quantity of loot that was apparently available to steal. The gun was repeatedly bashed into the pig farmer's teeth, which the ringleader, as Mr Baldwin remembered, had took great delight in. This was before Mr Daniels had ripped out the phone lines before the gang left, leaving Mr Baldwin barely unable to talk as well as without a phone. Mr Daniels warned the couple not to ring the police for an hour before issuing another chilling death threat. Mr Baldwin was told that if he or his partner rang the police before the hour that he had been instructed on, that someone would be back to shoot his genitals off. Mr Baldwin, who had lived and worked as a farmer, had required 19 different operations at 3 separate hospitals, all in a bid to try and save his foot over the last 2 years. He has not been able to walk since the brutal raid on his home. Mr Daniels, who was also from Kirkby, had pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated robbery, possession of a firearm with intent, and wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Mr Daniels was denying any involvement in the crime for a considerable period of time. This was before changing his plea just before the trial to guilty, when it was revealed that the police had substantial DNA evidence that had placed him at the bungalow. Mr Daniels' fingerprints, which were found on a paper knife which had been used to cut off a gold bracelet from Mr Baldwin's wrist, had saw Mr Daniels finally admit his crimes, and only to save his own skin, according to the judge. Mr Hill was handed 20 years for his part in the robbery, and Mr Sanders was handed 19 years for his part. During the robbery, 4 shotguns, a poacher's gun, a quantity of cash, a Raymond Vale watch worth about £500, a silver cuff bracelet worth about £160, a platinum diamond ring worth £5,000, car keys, and a yellow gold bracelet worth about £3,000 were stolen. The senior investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector Jason Richon of Lancashire Police, said, "It is clear these individuals are very dangerous and very violent offenders. What are your opinions on the crimes that were committed by the gang? Do you believe that the sentences that were given were too excessive or not harsh enough? Please let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more UK crime content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you can join us on the next video. Thanks for joining us today, and until next time, stay safe.